From the Bill of Rights Institute, Fabric of History weaves together U.S. history, founding principles, and what all of this means to us today. Join us as we pull back the curtains of the past to see what's inside.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Gary here, along, as always, with Mary and Eryn. So, Mary, I have a question for you. What are you working on these days?
I am still working on BRI's forthcoming AP U.S. History resource.
Sure,
Life,
good.
Liberty,
So for those following
Pursuit
along,
of Happiness
right,
is the title. It's coming out for this coming school year, for 2020 school year. Mark your calendars. It's really exciting. It's the history of the United States from 1491 to the present day. It's an enormous amount of research. There's over 90 scholars writing. There's all these teachers that have written assessments and helped us with primary sources. It's really a tremendous game changer. So,
right. And you've been spending quite a lot of time on it. I cannot wait to see it.
It's going to be pretty exciting.
What are the most recent aspects of it or areas? Are you in a particular time period? Or are you?
We are. So we're in the 60s.
Okay.
Which is such an interesting time. Good music, lots of conflict, lots of things changing. And I was actually looking at an essay earlier this week on the moon landing, which was in 1969. So we just had the 50th anniversary of the moon landing last year.
Right.
And I think it's we don't have any manned flights to the moon right now. So I think it's so interesting. Like, why did we go to the moon?
Right. Do you think Mars, is that coming up? I mean, not tomorrow, obviously, but I think we have the idea that someday we'll be doing manned missions. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and it's like I guess wonder, why is it Mars and not the other planets? I guess I just assume it's because they, out of all the planets, think that Mars is most likely to have had life.
I think
in the
it's
past?
Closer and won't immediately destroy us.
Yeah, and it also had water there,
Right.
So it's got to be. And the moon's old hat at this point, so Mars it is.
But your original question is why the moon in the 60s?
Right. Yeah. So why this space race? This was this huge thing, and we learn about it when we're little, and we have astronauts and Buzz Lightyear, and just what's the story there? Why do we go to the moon?
That is a great
place?
question.
And it really does enrapture people. And even though it was 50 years ago, or maybe the Space Force is getting privatized, or we're not on the moon anymore, but people are still very much enraptured by it because last year, being in DC, they put up the Apollo 11, yeah, is that on the Washington Monument every night, and you could go and see it. And then they did the launch of it in real time.
Yeah, that was very cool.
And I mean, I live very close to the mall, and there was just a ton of people every single night that were there.
That's so cool.
And so it's just like, I don't know, nothing has really changed. It still continues, even though we're not on the moon, to capture, attention.
I don't know that changed. I think there's always been a sense of wonder. I'm sure it goes
No, I'm not saying that it's changed. I'm just saying that even the moon landing was 50 years ago. There hasn't been anyone on the moon since a human hasn't been on the moon since 1972.
Right.
And so I just think that's why it's fascinating that it continues to be such a point of fascination for so many people when nobody's been on the moon in 50 years.
Well, think about how long from early human history until we got there is obviously a very long time. So I think somewhere to start maybe is why did it happen when it did? Like, why the 60s? I imagine technology has something to do with it, or what's going on in the world, or why then? Why not earlier?
Right. Why exactly? So I think, like most things, it started out with a disagreement.
Oh
no. So yes, technology was a big part of it. Actually, Nazi Germany was the first to research space travel when they were developing ballistic missiles. So if you know anything about Germany, a country born out of war, they know what's up when it comes to war. So they were looking into this. They created a V2 rocket, and so of course we're in World War II. So in the 1940s, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies fighting against Nazi Germany, and we're trying to capture all of this German research that they're doing on how to launch rockets and such like this. And once World War II ends, and then the United States and the Soviet Union realize, hey, we don't like each other at all. This is a very, very basic retelling of the origins of the Cold War. We cooperated for a little while, and then we decided it wasn't going to work out. So, of course, the United States, we detonate the first atomic bomb. We use it at the end of World War II twice. So that sort of launches this arms race. And I think that bleeds over into this idea of a space race, because if you have this bomb, if you have a missile, you can carry a bomb higher. So it's kind of connected. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's interesting that yeah, when I think of it, though, I also think like much earlier than that. I mean, early movies was like From the Earth to the Moon, right? You had this much earlier than warfare. It far predates World War II. But this concept that you could build, the concept of a rocket and bringing people safely to the moon is something that, it's interesting that they're tied in together, both kind of warfare and exploration, right? I mean, the idea of gunpowder itself was not originally for warfare, right? But so you have this really interesting sort of mix of the technology needed to do this wonderful thing, quite literally, can also be a very deadly thing.
Well, and also outside of just warfare, they would say space, the next frontier. And so it's almost like a continuation of Manifest Destiny. And this yeah.
Let's define that for our listeners at home who may be
the idea
on the younger side.
The idea that people can go out and conquer new lands, and they have a manifest destiny, or it's almost like a biblical thing that to take over and rule that land. And so manifest destiny is the concept that when we were heading out west, that we used to justify establishing any Western territory or, taking it from other people. And so I think in some ways that space is kind of a continuation of that. It's like who can get there first and say it's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so implicit in the idea of manifest destiny is that the United States, our way of doing everything, our culture, our way of life is superior. So anybody in our way has to sort of assimilate or get out of the way. But then space was this competition with the Soviet Union, and our way, capitalism is better than the Soviet way. So I think that's
and it's kind of like they work together then, because it was a fear. It was a fear that during the Cold War we did not want the USSR to take over ideologically territories, and so but it's also so it's like it's a frontier quote unquote thing, but it's also an arms race.
But there's a clock ticking, because if we don't go there, someone else will,
and I think
that would be bad for
those
us.
two run very much aligned together,
right?
And I think they both have connections to the space race,
which makes sense with the origin you were saying about the V2 and things. If we don't develop something, someone else could develop. This technology concept is out there. Right. And whoever gets to it first, it's very important whoever gets to it first.
Right. And it's you lose face if you're not there first, because the Soviet Union is the first to launch a satellite, right? They launched Sputnik in 1957, and the United States is just like shocked. It changes everything. Sputnik raises the stakes. Fun fact, Sputnik means fellow traveler in Russian, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Well, that's very sweet. Had a huge
Who's their
impact.
fellow traveler?
Was that?
Oh, I just wonder who their fellow traveler is. Is it someone in their own country, or
I don't know.
It's just a side question. Something to think about.
That would be the sort of thing that I would say to my class of students, and then they would be like Eryn and ask a lot of follow-up questions that I can't answer, and that's what they will fixate on and remember.
So if you have thoughts on that, write to comments at fabricofhistory.org.
It is an excellent question, and I don't know, and I would say you should look that up, because there's lots of things that I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, who came up with that?
That is really interesting.
Anyways.
That is a really interesting question.
See, I hear that and I think about the impact on education. Also, fun fact, how that led to so many changes in our education system, including required world language learning and phys ed classes and things like this, because that fear really had a huge impact to this day. Why science classes and why you study chemistry in high school, things like this, that find their roots in that one launch of one fellow traveler.
Right. So it really did. I think it was a watershed moment for the United States. Like, crap, we need to step up our game. So in 1958, so just 1 year later, Congress passes the National Aeronautics and Space Act, which creates NASA. And they also pass the National Defense Education Act, which leads to a lot of changes that Gary just mentioned. So the reason you have a lab in science class goes back to this act. So we need science, math, engineering. We need to beat the Soviets. So there was kind of this idea that science is going to equal our security. We need scientists who can make us compete, not just compete, but win in this race to get up into space.
I think a lot of students who are listening to this are now going to take that quote from Mary and go back to all their teachers and say, I don't know, the beginning of this was because we needed labs because of the space race and the Soviets. I don't know. Some might say it's still a problem.
That was awesome to me.
Yeah,
but as a kid,
I'm saying like me being one of them in high school who did not like chemistry and science, I would take that back to my teacher and be like, do we really need this anymore?
See, I was on the side where I was reading, comic books of the atomic age and all these like amazing, fantastical things that science could do, and it's like it was associated with greatness in a way, like really pushing yourself.
I found my greatness other places.
Well, I appreciate. I think I appreciated in high school, and I certainly appreciate now the importance of science and engineering, but. In labs, I was just the kid who couldn't turn on the Bunsen burner.
Oh, interesting.
And poured chromium nitrate down the sink once when it was supposed to be disposed of in the chemical hood. So I may have caused a fish kill on the Chesapeake Bay around the year 2005.
Yeah, I was one of those model rocket, kids with the.
I would have wanted to use my lab partner, Gary.
I used moon boots. That's about as far as I got.
Right.
Anyways.
So education changes. So we're trying to educate the next generation so we can compete in the space race. And that leads to some big changes. And also we have NASA created. So hopefully, can the United States overtake Russia? We'll see after this quick break. Okay, we're back. So before we left you for our quick break, we had just created NASA with the hope that the United States can catch up in the space race. So NASA was created in 1958. And unfortunately, we weren't doing so well. So the Russians, again, were the first to launch a human into space. So they beat us with Sputnik, and now they beat us with an actual cosmonaut. And then, so things aren't looking really good. So in 1962, President Kennedy makes his famous speech about challenging the United States that we're going to land someone on the moon.
That's a big claim for how we were doing it.
Yeah, he was really setting the bar pretty high.
So much so that we still refer to a moonshot as being like promising something, or at least like scoping something out that we don't even know how we can do it, but we really, really want to. Right?
Yeah.
We still use that phrase, moonshot.
Yeah.
That or Hail Mary.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, it's a great speech. I used to play it for my students. So he's speaking at Rice University in Houston, Texas, and he says, "We choose to go to the moon." I'm not going to try to do his accent because I'll sound like Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons. But we choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. So that's that famous line. So we're gonna put a man on the moon because we're a leader of nations. And
see, that's really interesting. That goes back to that, it's about the getting there, right? Rather than he didn't say we will get to the moon because of the Soviet Union,
right? Yeah, you can't say that.
You can't say or even maybe that's not what makes it something to rally behind.
At the root of both of it is a competition.
You think?
Yes, it's because it's who's going to get there first. Who's going to establish being number one, right?
Not just getting there at all. Not just to show that it can be done.
That's what his rhetoric is implying. Maybe it's both.
But it's like it was still a space race. It was about who could get there. And I think the reason it became this competition was because it was something that hadn't been done before. And it was about, well, we need to prove that because honestly, Russia was first, right? Maybe they were the first ones like, we're going to try something that hasn't been done before.
Sure, right.
And then the United States said, oh no, we're going to get there first.
We intend to be first. I'm quoting the speech again. Our leadership in science and in industry, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation.
See, it's a general. It's to rally behind this general idea of like, we are awesome. We can do this.
America.
You can get really, you can get really invested in a feeling like that, right? You believe in ourselves. We don't know how, but we'll figure it out because we're all very smart and we're all really dedicated and we have perseverance.
Right. Yes. And so I think the space program really picks up in earnest in the 60s, and then just the courage and sort of the persistence of these astronauts. So there are accidents along the way, but we do launch Apollo 11, lands Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. The third astronaut, I don't know his name, and now I feel
Tom
terrible.
Collins?
Oh, isn't that a cocktail?
Tom Collins? Wait, no, it's something Collins. Mike Collins.
Okay.
I was going to say, is that where we get the name of the drink from?
I'm sorry, I was thinking of something completely different.
Terrible.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Mike Collins is
Gary's ready for happy
Gary is
hour.
drinking right now. That's not true.
Hi,
That's that's not true at all.
It's after hours. Mike Collins. Tom Collins. We can edit that or not. I have no idea what Haley will do.
We
with
gotta
that.
leave that one in, please.
Okay.
So
anyway, yeah, he was the ride home.
right, yeah,
he had a loop a few times and keep the lights on.
Still important, but
very important.
Yeah,
I
like
imagine
the
he's
teamwork.
out
They
there
couldn't
listening.
have done it without him.
Otherwise,
but
they'd
it's
be
funny we
stuck
don't
on the moon.
know his name. It's,
Right.
or it's not as his name is lost. Often we think of Neil Armstrong and even Buzz Aldrin, but not Michael Collins.
Just let's call him Tom Collins again. Okay.
I half blanked on our own names earlier today.
Yeah,
That's true.
right. So they plant the American flag on the moon. It's still there today. They collect a bunch of rocks, and everybody watches it on TV. You can see the rocks at the Smithsonian.
See, again, I'm so nerdy. To me, it's like Mission Control was really cool to me. Like all those other folks. That's in a commercial right now that I think is such a powerful commercial for Indeed.
I think
Which is about like all of the people it takes to do something like that. To me, is such like a cool American '60s thing of like the computers and monitoring this and that and all the little factors and Hidden Figures. That movie, all these things are just so powerful in terms of what it took and how much know-how to do what sounds simple,
right.
landing a thing on the moon and putting a flag on the ground,
Right.
and yet
It's
unbelievable what it took to do that.
It is unbelievable. I shouldn't have sounded so glib. So
No,
I know.
no.
No, you're right, because I think it happened before I was born, and it's just we take it for granted. But all of the work and all of the people's blood, sweat, and tears and mental, work,
Right.
energy to get that to happen is really amazing. It's really a pretty incredible achievement. What mankind can do when we put our money and our where our mouth is. But, interestingly, once after the moon landing, space exploration, it sort of dies down in the 70s. So we got there and it was really exciting and everyone's watching it on TV when these guys are walking around on the moon. And then people interest starts to peter out a little bit.
Do you think because the goal is less clear, right? The goal, again, of like being the first group to put a flag on a plot of land on another celestial body, very clear goal. You know when you did it.
Right.
And do you think, tossing it out there, that it was because another goal wasn't as clear, right? Is it like
I think
first one to orbit a certain amount of times? Like that's not as
and then
sexy.
Because once you got to the moon and a lot of the work that NASA has been doing since, it's just a lot of science and different research. And that doesn't, they all individually have goals, but there's not one big goal anymore. And it's not that race that I was talking about earlier. It's no longer a competition. It's just very particular and nuanced research that's getting done.
Right, exactly. I mean, tons of work is happening. It's just not the kind that people are around their TVs watching. But I mean, like, even today, we are, like, trying to get to asteroids to mine things. Like, these are cool things.
Well, yeah, also, but
it's not
when
like
that
on
picture
a
of
day,
the black hole came out,
right?
that was pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah, that was something that also had befuddled scientists for quite some time.
Yeah.
And they're like, we finally have a photo
Yeah.
of a black hole.
So there's if there's a really clear goal, and I think that's kind of writ large. We were talking earlier about the idea of a moonshot. Like, as a nation, being able to rally around a particular thing is very powerful. And I think there's doing the hard work that you need and that's back to the persistence thing. That I think there may be a time again, but I'm just saying, just during the 70s, like, a lot was going on in the 70s. It just wasn't TV broadcast primetime stuff.
Right. And there's also, I mean, going back to what Eryn said about the race, so we're pursuing a policy of détente in the Cold War, so we're de-escalating, we're sort of ratcheting it back, so it dies, the quote-unquote sexiness of manned flight to the moon just kind of peters out. But we start using space shuttles, U.S. space program, in the 1980s. So, and the building of the space station. So space didn't go away. We're still doing the research, and then you have the age of the space shuttle in the 1980s.
And the space shuttle was just to take as a kind of a people mover type of thing.
Right.
An astronaut mover.
It's like a people mover.
I think
Yeah,
it
it's like
is
a bus.
something.
It's literally a shuttle.
Yeah,
It's like
because I think that's something that's
A literal shuttle.
I hear space shuttle all the time.
Right.
All the time. But I haven't ever actually stopped to think about the purpose of a space shuttle.
It's being reusable. That's what made it remarkable. The idea that you could land it like an airplane when you were done with it and use it again was unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Prior to that, you had to drop it in the ocean and lose this multi-million-dollar piece of
Yep.
technology.
Yep, remember seeing that.
Yeah.
But I think even, if we younger listeners or whoever, it's like, what is the purpose of having a space shuttle? Yes, for it to be reused, to move people, but I guess supplies as well.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can see the space shuttle at the Air and Space Museum in Chantilly.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that where
the
Columbia?
giant-
Is it Columbia that's there? No,
Columbia is.
No,
It is.
Columbia. Right.
No.
I don't know which one it is then, but there is a space shuttle there. Maybe we'll look that up and get back to you during our break.
I want to say
But-
Enterprise is there.
No, that's Star Trek.
It is Star Trek, but it also
But it was
is the
an
name of a
actual.
space
Oh,
shuttle.
okay. I was like, are you pulling my leg, Gary?
Am I wrong? No, there totally was.
To be determined.
Anyway,
But the final space shuttle flight occurs in 2011.
right.
And a human has not been on the moon since 1972. But we still have NASA. So what does the future hold with space?
Well, a lot of privatization, that's been fascinating to watch, is a lot of these billionaires deciding to test out their own spaceships, for better or for worse.
Right, because I think it's fuzzy when it comes to geography of space, right? So, I mean, on a map, the United States has some pretty clear boundaries, east, west, north, south, that kind of thing. But as far as vertically going, like who and what jurisdiction and what you can do in space, I think is a little fuzzy for a lot of folks.
Right. Well, that's why you have these random billionaires who aren't attached to any specific country, really, being able to take these spaceships up there because they're like, oh, it doesn't matter to whom it doesn't matter who we're sending up there, really. You're talking about geography of countries. I'm talking about private companies. So a geography implies a specific
But
government.
they're citizens of countries.
Yes, but they're also privatizing something. So if they're
So
offering
you're saying
up,
they're not representing a country when they send someone into space.
correct, and
They
they have a
are
private
showing-
for-profit company,
Right.
and anyone who's willing to pay $1 million to go up into space, they'll take them there.
Right. And to show that it is possible to develop technology that can bring people up into space for, say, vacation or whatever reason one would go into space.
To show you
An
can.
unparalleled customer experience.
What are you quoting?
I am quoting Virgin Galactic. Their mission is to be the space line for Earth.
like a space line, right?
using,
So I just,
using space
you know?
for good while delivering an unparalleled customer experience.
So a really
5
nice
stars.
trip to space.
Yes.
Not representing a country or any kind of military thing, just to go.
Space for space.
Much like early airplanes for vacation. There were airplanes, obviously, for the military, but there are also airplanes for vacation, and you can do that.
I'm good on Earth, but I respect that if people have the money and want to go, then they should be able to go.
Yeah, some people are just so enraptured by it, and I'm just.
I think having a destination it would be cool.
I think
I wouldn't even want to be on the moon. That doesn't, or anywhere in space. It just doesn't sound that fun.
I think it's all about your priorities. So I think the priority is something we can explore a little bit more when we come back from break. Okay, so we're back, and before we left you, we were talking about this idea of value. So is it worth paying all this money to go into space? So there is a definite cost to go up into space. So
Right, the technology, even though it's decades, it's still not exactly cheap and easy.
Right. So
Despite having shuttles.
Yeah, well, it wasn't cheap back then either.
So NASA spent $150 billion in today's money to put a man on the moon. Adjusted for GDP, any ideas what that would be in today's money?
Like 3 times as much? Like
500?
Higher.
501.
$1 trillion.
$1 million. No. $640 billion in today's money.
$640 billion.
If it and adjusted in
Just to
terms
put
of
someone on
GDP.
the moon.
Well, it's
To put a man on a moon.
Again, it's in the history books, but
Yeah, I wonder. None of us might have the answer to this,
great.
but we can. It's something to think about. I think people. I just wonder. I guess it was public knowledge how much they spent at the time. It had to be.
Well,
right?
they must have
Freedom of Information Act. Did that exist?
That didn't exist.
No.
But they must have. They must have been
Or
some
that
concept
version.
of how
Right.
much money was being spent.
Having to be transparent. But I just wonder if they were had what sounded like a very positive public backing.
Right. Well,
But I wonder, that is a lot of money.
It is, but I think that's why it's a question of value, rather. What is the value of getting to the moon the equivalent of $648 billion?
But
So
were there people who had a problem with that?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's still people. So NASA still exists today, and every now and then you pop up, oh, why do we still need this? But in the 60s, for sure, there were people who didn't they valued spending that money on things a little bit closer to home rather than putting someone on the moon. So actually in 1966, so this is before someone landed on the moon, but after President Kennedy's challenge that we would
So
land
right
someone
in
on
the
moon.
process
In the
of-
process, the
right.
space race. Martin Luther King says when he's testifying to the U.S. Senate on race and urban poverty, in a few years we can be assured that we will set a man on the moon, and with an adequate telescope he will be able to see the slums on Earth with their intensified congestion, decay, and turbulence.
Wow.
So I think it's...
So was he therefore implying that if all the money that we've spent to get this man to the moon, he'll look back on Earth that we didn't spend money on?
Or he'll just look back on an Earth that's full of problems, with
why-
poverty,
full
and
of problems
racism.
that money
could have been
could have been
spent.
used for those said problems.
Right.
That was his implication.
No. And this is something that I just learned about today, because when you're a little kid, at least when I was a little kid, and you learn about the space race and the moon landing, it's this great achievement, and there's less on people who didn't really question it or didn't see it maybe as an achievement, because there were bigger problems that needed to be solved. So even when the Saturn V rocket is launched, that's the rocket that takes Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins to the moon. there was protests there. So there was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So that was the group that Martin Luther King was in charge of in 1969. Of course, he's already been assassinated, but his successor, Ralph Abernathy, carried a sign that said, $12 a day to feed an astronaut. We could feed a starving child for $8. We may go on from this day to Mars and to Jupiter and even to the heavens beyond, but as long as racism, poverty, and hunger and war prevail on Earth, we as a civilized nation have failed. Pretty powerful.
It is very powerful.
It's also really interesting because I guess maybe in my student mind, the civil rights movement and the space race always operated in very parallel fields, and I never thought of them kind of crossing over each other.
Yes. I think that is true for a lot of classrooms. You teach a topic and you don't, they are all they're all like,
they're all happening at the same time.
I'm taking this interconnected motion with my hands, which you cannot see.
Yeah.
But
and
that's what I'm
how
doing.
They impact one another. And
Right. They're not just simultaneous. There's actual.
Yeah. And sometimes I think even as a kid, I would forget that they were happening at the same time because they seemed like such disparate events.
Right. It's a powerful way to rephrase what was happening in the earlier segment on President Kennedy's speech about showing greatness by doing this, and the idea that if a nation is truly great, what does that mean for how it's treating its citizens and how things are going? You know what I mean? Like that greatness, for some reason, and maybe it's a strange parallel to try to make a connection here of our fabric, but I think about like in other civilizations throughout history, the civilization has to get to a certain point to do be creativity. So I'm thinking of like Athens, right? You need to get to a certain point internally, your structure, in order to create art and to do these amazing other wondrous things. And so I think looking at landing on the moon as being this amazing thing that's proof that a civilization, the American civilization, is great, is one perspective. But then part of that narrative is, yes, but is it entirely great in terms of how it is structurally and how it's working out?
And I think it's like, who is it serving?
Right.
Yeah, that's a really great short way of putting it, Eryn. I like that a lot. No, I'm not being facetious. I'm serious. But it's, I think it is. I mean, it's an amazing achievement. I'm thinking of a meme that I used to.
Married her memes.
Yes, I used to show my students. It was a picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon, and it said, "We did not get to the moon by screwing around on our phones." I may have adjusted the language in that for the students, but it really is. I think it is a tremendous achievement. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of other problems going on in the United States that needed attention and weren't getting the attention perhaps that they deserved. So it's a complicated, messy story. And I think we don't always tell it that way, but I think it's important to do so. And that doesn't make the achievement any less great, in my opinion. It's just that it colors it in, I don't know, it makes it more nuanced, or I'm not making sense.
I completely understand, because even within NASA and space and everything we're doing there, thinking about how long it took to get a female astronaut. And last year we delayed the spacewalk because the spacesuit for these female astronauts, they couldn't design it to fit them properly. And they had to go back and rework it. And I think that that's another question of who is this serving and who is it important to and who was included in this great achievement at the time. In the 1960s, it was a white man, and that was it, right? And not for everyone else. And then, how long did it take until we got a female astronaut? I don't even know the answer to that, but I think that's still being built upon.
So I think it's important to celebrate our achievements and what we are capable of doing, but to acknowledge at the same time that there is work to be done. I think that is certainly true in 2020. It will always be true. Yes. Nothing is simple. So we are running out of time here today on the Fabric of History, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you see the moon landing? Have you seen the moon rocks? Have you been to the Eryn Space Museum? What do you think about space and the future? What does it hold? Are we going to Mars? We'd love to hear your thoughts. So you can email us at comments@fabricofhistory.org. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Keep looking up.
The Bill of Rights Institute engages, educates, and empowers individuals with a passion for the freedom and opportunity that exists in a free society. Check out our educational resources and programs on our website, mybri.org. Any questions or suggestions for future episodes? We'd love to hear from you. Just email us at comments@fabricofhistory.org. And don't forget to visit us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to stay connected and informed about future episodes. Thank you for listening.